there was a group of people, this is part of what we're going to talk about today. Grant, you can go to the next one. There's a group of people who had been dreaming about what we were going to do, and a lot of it felt like out there one day kind of stuff. And so when we started here, we actually said, hey, we're going to try to be in by Easter no matter what. So we got occupancy on Good Friday for this building. Yay. And we kind of skidded in, I don't know if that's a word, to this building on Easter. And so I'll tell you, on Easter Sunday this past year, we haven't talked about this a lot, but I think it's just fun to talk about. On Easter, we had 378 people that came to our church at Easter, which is extraordinary. That's a big deal. And the reason it's extraordinary, I'm going to tell you why these numbers matter, is because when the kind of church that we're trying to create in our community, every story is connected to one of these numbers, right? Many of you are here and you've experienced life change because you've been a part of this church and experienced that. And since we have come into this space as well, 86 people have come to our church for the very first time. And on any given weekend, we've grown by about 33% any given weekend, which is pretty incredible. Now, in the same time frame, which is also fun, so and I'll be done with this part in a second. What's also fun is at the same time, we had just launched dinner parties. How many of you have been a part of a dinner party real quick? That's pretty great. Yeah, so there's about 68 people that were part of dinner parties that we launched in November. So we launched our biggest initiatives outside of Sunday morning. And in November, we did the capital campaign, giving kind of stuff in November as well. And then in December, we sort of lost the building and we said, hey, here we going. So it was a really kind of crazy season as we went there. But 68 of you went from sitting in a row to sitting in homes and circles after that. Now, the number that I get most excited about, and this is what we kind of celebrate the most and talk about a lot, is since coming into this building and at Easter, and I love this, we've had 32 people who acknowledge that they gave their life to Christ in this space since we've come into this building. And that's a big deal for us. Yeah, you can clap for that. That's amazing. It's really fun. And so for us, I want to tell you this. Many of you are here and your only experience has been since we've been here, which is incredible. And then many of you were part of the team that came in here and helped us sort of build and create this space. And you've been a part of the journey for a long time. And so what I want to do today is I want to talk just for a few minutes about where we are and where we're going. And I'll tell you, the great thing about our church, as you can kind of see, is we come into one service together and we kind of overflow in there and kids, all this kind of stuff. It's a great space and we immediately started to outgrow. So we sort of went to 2 services pretty quick. And if you come to the 9:30 service, you're probably like, man, it's cramped in here. And you come to the 11, you're like, what are we talking about? A little bit. There's a little bit of that because there's a little bit more space at 11. But what's interesting is it becomes so full, we had to do 2 services. We started doing that. And the reason that we started doing that is because we want to be a church that's very much on mission. And our mission is not to create a church just for church people, right? And so our mission from day one, and it's been a little bit different. There's a lot of great churches in Columbus. But one of the things that we've been very focused on is creating a church not just for unchurched people. There's a lot of unchurched people, but creating a church for people who have doubts and questions about faith, Christians who have sort of a box of questions about faith that they sort of are asking and trying to dive into and trying to figure out. And really sort of our parking spot and the whole big parking lot of churches is creating a place for people who can really explore their faith. And we believe that the reason a lot of people don't come to churches isn't because they're not cool enough, because there's a lot of cool churches. Now, isn't because, it doesn't have great music or good preaching or groups, all that kind of stuff. It's not those things. A lot of people resist coming to church because they don't feel like they can come and actually ask questions that matter in their life. And so I put in my notes, I said it this way, like many people, and you know this, and some of you are these people, many people find it easy to resist attending a church. And like you, right, there were Sundays where they woke up on Sunday morning and they didn't have to worry about what time church was starting. They just woke up and made pancakes, and sometimes their dad made them and it was really good, and sometimes, maybe most of the time, they weren't really good. You had a little bit of that. And people woke up and the furthest thing from their mind on Sunday morning was attending church. And the reason for that can be all over the place, but the furthest thing in their mind was attending church. And some people, it's because of their story. A lot of people have been hurt by the local church. A lot of people felt like the church was hypocritical. And then you got all the politics around, like what church is, and it gets really intertwined for a lot of places. And a lot of people just resisted that. Now, for some of you though, some of you grew up and you attended as a kid, and when you attended as a kid, I'm going to ask you this, you found it boring, a little bit irrelevant, and not authentic. So real quick, that's just so we can all have a confessional together. There actually is kind of a confessional in the lobby. We want to talk about that. Here's what I'd love for you to do. If that was you and you grew up around church, but you just didn't find it relevant to your life as you got older, I'd love for you just to raise your hand. I'm kind of curious. That was just not your thing. thing growing up? Yeah. So what happens is, and you know this, a lot of people grow up and they just sort of slept in the pew as a kid because it wasn't actually speaking to their life. And they eventually, and you know this too, they were handed a version of faith that didn't progress with them as they progressed. It didn't move forward with them as they grew up, and they stopped attending as soon as they could. So they got 18, 19, 20 years old, sometimes depending on their parents, 14, 15, or 16, and they stopped attending the local church. And there's a version of this where we talk about de-church people or people who got disconnected from church along the way. And what's interesting about Columbus is that the number of people who are in that camp or don't identify with any religious affiliation at all is extraordinarily high. Extraordinarily high. So I want to show you this real quick. In fact, you can look at it this way. And I've shown you this picture before. Some of you heard me talk about this. The Ohio State football stadium, right? You could fill this 9 times with the number of people in the greater Columbus area who would say that they don't have any religious affiliation at all. And we're not talking about creasters, you know what I mean? Like I'm loosely connected, I show up for Christmas and Easter, we're not talking about that. It's not people who are even just engaged in other religions. These are people who would say, I don't identify with any religion at all. And for many of you, again, you might not say it out loud, but you've just found yourself going, I don't know what I think, or I don't know what I believe, or you're here because you care about somebody who doesn't know what they think, or they don't know what they believe. And so for us, when we started talking about a church, I'll tell you the easiest way to create a church is to build a church and then to steal other people from other churches. And we didn't really want to do that. That's not what we wanted to do. We were just a little bit hipper, a little bit cooler, a little bit whatever. That's how you do. And that wasn't really our goal, right? And we said it from day one. Our goal was to create a church with people who were passionate about this kind of thing and who work to create this kind of space for people. And so for us, when we talk about this is the story of a lot of people who would wake up on Sundays disconnected from the whole thing. And they had this like deeply rooted belief that many of you had at some point in your life, and this was the belief that many people had, that even if they believed, they would never belong, right? Even if they believed, they would never, ever belong to a church. And this was kind of the thing. Like you believe that you would never belong to a church, that you would never be a part of one. Many of you were like that as soon as you got from high school on. And then what happens is this. At some point along the way, and this has been some of your story, somebody like invites you and then you say no gracefully. How many of you, real quick, how many of you ever said no to somebody gracefully who invited you to a church like that? Anybody ever done that before? And by gracefully, you just had something to do that Sunday, which was actually nothing. Anybody? Yeah, you have that. And then they just kept coming back. They sort of nagged you. Some people they bribe you with, like, hey, Bridge Park's across the way, we'll just go to the Pearl at the end of it, you know what I mean? Maybe you got some of that. You got all these sorts of things. And eventually through the invite, you hear invite after invite, and eventually somebody says yes, and then you decide to show up, right? And this is the story of so many of you. You decided to come, and if you have kids, you know this, right? If you have kids especially, you wake up early, you gotta convince your kids to get in the car, and speaking of bribing, you have to bribe your kids to get in the car on time, and you sort of get them all in the minivan, you load them up, you kind of move through, at least in our minivan, all of the crap in our van. You do this to kind of load them up, you get them fastened in, and then at the end of the day, especially if you have young kids, your wife, she got all dressed up and she shows up, and then right before you walk in, the kid spits up on them. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. This is really just this morning for us. I don't know how this works for you. You rally, you get everybody together, you get off of the car, you eventually come to church, and if you came here, it's interesting, you pull up, and as you're pulling up, there's a massive sign that still says La Scala, and there's a little bit of you that goes, is it still a restaurant? Like you're not really sure, you know what I mean? And you showed up and somebody promised you that it still was a church, and you finally got there and you drove fast so you wouldn't be late. You come on in, you get there and there's a parking team, you find your parking spot, you walk in, and on the outside, it certainly doesn't look like any church that you've ever been to before. And then you finally come in and you probably met somebody as you were walking in who had already had 3 or 4 cups of coffee, and they were a little bit more amped than you already were, you know what I mean? Which I love that. They give you a high five, whatever, as you walk in. And then you meet somebody, you get coffee, and it's really good coffee. Thank you, Bev. Is Bev in the room today, by the way? Bev got here like 6 a.m. this morning to make coffee, which is pretty great. I would have loved it if Bev would have walked in at that moment. That would have been great, yeah. And then all of a sudden you do this, and this is probably my favorite part. If you have kids, by the time you get to like dropping off your kids, there's a little bit, when you think about the psychology of dropping off your kids to a church, you don't know any of these people. There's a ton of kids in there, and there's a bunch of adults saying, hey, drop them off here. I promise you it's okay. And they've already had more coffee than the greeters, so they're already more excited anyway. And then something happens, and I love this. Something happens, and this happens in our kids' environments all the time, where however it works, they're trustworthy enough for you to lean in. In fact, I think for people all the time, this is probably one of the things that we do that matters the most, is a group of volunteers that are trustworthy enough and say, hey, we want you to be a part. And then you go and you drop off your kids and you walk across the building into a restaurant that you might have memories in, and you make your way in here and you find a seat. And by the time you get in here, maybe music started, all that kind of stuff. You find your seat in the auditorium, you walk in, you sit down. If you get here early, you're not sure what to do, so you sit there by yourself and kind of look around. And if you're introverted like I am, you kind of pray that nobody talks to you. No, that's just me. Yeah, that's great. And then somebody talks to you or that sort of thing. You finally come in, and then the band comes up. This is always my favorite part. And they're just as amped as the kids people were. Like, they're even more excited. They're singing songs that you don't really understand. Like, I love today singing a song about the stand and asking you to raise your hands. And the only other time that you've done that in life is actually at a football game. You know what I mean? Like, you don't do that at all. And they're asking you to sing. You do all this kind of stuff. And then somebody comes up and they go through the announcements like I did, probably really fast. And you move through, do worship stuff, and then if you've come before, there's a message, and that guy, he's a dork. We don't like him at all. And then you hear these messages, you go through the message, and at some point it felt helpful enough for you to go, okay, I might come back. And then you kind of gather the kids, and then when you were leaving, right, you kind of think about like when you're leaving, you go pick up your kids. And here's the interesting thing about your kids, that's what I love. Your kids loved it. Your kids liked it more than you liked it. Right? They just had a great time and they enjoyed it. They loved it. They showed up. They do that sort of thing. You pick them up, saw that same greeter, and now he's had 4 more cups of coffee, so he's even more amped. You high five him and you try to like scoot around. You get out there, and here's the thing that you would probably say, especially if you kept coming back. It's not that you liked it so much, it's that you just didn't hate it as much as you thought you would. And there was something about it. Oh, I get it. I know. I'm just saying. I know, right? And you go, maybe I'm going to come back. And this is the story of people all the time. And this is what I love, right? And then you come back, and then what you do is you come back every once in a while. You come back once or twice a month, maybe. You come like once every 6 or 8 weeks. And then at some point along the way, that once every 6 or 8 weeks becomes like you just come on a rhythm and you start accidentally coming more. And then your kids start begging you to come because they really had a great time, and you show up. And then all of a sudden somebody asks you, this is my favorite thing. They ask you, it comes up in conversation, and you let it slip. Here's what you do. You let it slip. And you say, oh, I go to Nuvo, right? And as soon as you say that, they go, what is Nuevo? Right? See, I'm telling you, I get it, right? And it slips out, and here's what slips out. You ready? What slips out is that now you believe that you would never belong to a local church. And accidentally, you found yourself belonging to a community of people that you got into. And here's what's interesting. It's you don't even believe everything. Like, you believed you would never belong, but now all of a sudden you're part of it. And you start coming, and you actually start accidentally enjoying it. And then you start accidentally telling people about it. It becomes a part of your rhythm and routine and your life and your family's life. And at some point along the way, you've heard us do this. You've heard us talk about dinner party. We talked about 68 of you jumped into a dinner party, and you step into another place and you actually start talking about your life. And you don't just start sitting around talking about your feelings. It's not that. You start talking about questions that you have. And you start sitting with other people who have questions too, and you move in the proximity of this sort of direction together, and your life begins to change. And this is what we've seen over and over again when we talk about the 32 people. All of a sudden, they didn't, do what? Make it 33. I see that hand. There you go. See, I grew up Southern Baptist. I know how to do it. That's great. And so here's what happens, right? All of a sudden, when you lean in, something begins to shift and change about your world and your life. And people give their life to Christ, and things begin to change. And then all of a sudden, when that begins to happen, you become a part of something that you didn't think you would ever become a part of. And we put it this way, that all of a sudden now you belong and you believe. And you didn't mean to. I grew up in an environment, it was kind of a joke, which I love that you make the joke. It's like now everybody close their eyes, bow their heads, and we just pray this thing together and everything works out. Which I believe a piece of that. But the other part of this is to go, a lot of people just all of a sudden stumble into what it means to follow Jesus. And what we're talking about today, and where we're going to spend some of our time, it had nothing to do with a pastor. It had nothing to do with a building. It had anything to do with a church name, because most of the time you can't even pronounce it when you're trying to tell people, and you certainly can't spell it because of AutoCheck, you know? It wasn't a program or a ministry. You got connected to a local church, and don't miss this, because of a group of people who were on mission together. And this isn't a thing that's new, right? This is where I love teaching out of the Bible. This is not a new thing. This is like I didn't stumble into this sort of thing. This is something that's deeply rooted in what's been happening in Christianity for years and years and years, millennia. This is how the local church got started. It's a group of people who leaned in together to create spaces for people, especially in the ancient world, who had no reason to both believe or belong to those communities. But those communities became so irresistible to their areas of the world and ultimately the world that things began to change. And so what we're going to do is I want to look at a short passage of scripture, and this is where we're going to spend just a little bit of our time, where Jesus does something that's really odd and very weird. He challenges a group of people to do something that didn't make a lot of sense. And so in this context, Jesus had been doing miraculous things. People showed up in a lot of ways to hear Jesus teach, not because of what he was teaching, but in sort of bigger part because of the things that he was doing. So if somebody like does something miraculous, you show up to it, right? Like I went and saw Dude Perfect on YouTube. Anybody watch Dude Perfect? Anybody? You have any Dude Perfect people? I'm comparing Dude Perfect to Jesus for sure. That's exactly what I'm doing. Yeah. My son's all into this. I was not. We started watching Dude Perfect, and I just love their entire brand is built on we're going to do something extraordinary, and people are just going to show up and watch, and now they're on tour, right? And I'm just laughing like that's their whole thing. Jesus grew a crowd early on, not because of all the things that he taught, because of a lot of the things that he was doing. And a lot of people, and this is what I grew up in, would talk about what it meant to follow Jesus as if it were easy and everything would be better and your life would just be great. That's not at all what Jesus teaches to this group of people. In fact, as he invites them to follow him, he talks about how the cost was really, really high. It wasn't pretty. It would be something that's sacrificial to this group of people. And so the writer of this area of the Bible that we're going to look at, he's a physician. His name is Luke. He's given all of these sorts of details to the account, and he highlights the difficult parts about what Jesus taught and invited this group of people into. And here's what he says, right? So you got this group of people after the Lord, being Jesus appointed, he appoints 72 people, right? 72 people. So he had this massive crowd of followers. They had all sort of been leaning into different levels. He looks at this crowd of followers and he brings out ordinary people. There's nothing magical about 72 except for the fact of it's 72 extremely ordinary individuals. And then Luke goes on and he says this. After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them out 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. And so as Jesus would travel all over the ancient world, what he was going to do is he was sending these groups of people out 2 by 2 all over sort of this area of the world to go ahead of him. Now, this is what's so fascinating. Nobody ever likes to talk about this, but I think this is so much fun. I talked about this a few weeks ago. Jesus doesn't need the group of people to do this, right? Jesus didn't need them to show up in the town. That's not what's happening. Jesus created an environment where he invited people to join him and be a part. And whatever needed to be done, Jesus had the capacity to do that. But Jesus was establishing a model here that would be the model that the local church would be built on moving forward. He sends people out into these communities on mission to make a difference. Then it goes on, and Luke says it this way. He said, he told them, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are, can we say this together? Man, that's fun. See, now you feel like you're in church, right? You got to repeat back. There you go. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into the harvest field. Now, you don't harvest, I don't think, unless you live in Plant City. Maybe some of you harvest out there. I don't know. I'm just kidding. It's a joke. Right, so you get this. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. My wife grew up in a cornfield. I don't know. Like, it's great. So you get it. There's a little bit of this. There's a little bit. It's where you go. He's making a reference that makes no sense to many people in our culture, but he's saying this, that there's an opportunity for something extraordinary, but a very small group of people who have the capacity in this moment to experience what the extraordinary is going to be. This was the mission. And 72 people stepped up to be a part of that sort of thing. And what they had no idea about in this moment, that Jesus wasn't just a rabbi teaching, he was launching a movement that would ultimately change the world. And the idea of a harvest and the people that are doing this is that there would be a seed that would be planted that would one day grow, and as it grew, it would make a difference in the lives of the people who were in that area. And they would have been thinking all sorts of things around this, but Jesus knew this, right? And Jesus knew this, and this is what the local church has been built on for thousands of years. Jesus knew this, that their choice to step up would have a greater impact than they could ever imagine. And this is the part that a lot of people, and I think churches miss, the greater impact both for themselves and for other people. That there's a personal and an external impact to stepping up and saying, I'm going to follow this mission sacrificially wherever it takes me. And then Jesus does what I think any great leader does. He stands up and gives the best motivational speech that you could ever give to a group of people. And he highlights all the reasons why they shouldn't want to do this. I love this. He eventually stands up, and the 72 or whatever, they volunteer. They're a part of this. He's about to send them all out. And he's like, let me bring clarity to exactly what we're talking about. He says this. He says, go. I am sending you out like lambs among wolves. Have fun, Saw you, bro. I believe in you, like whatever that is. I'm sending you out as lambs among wolves. I am sending you out into a culture that is not friendly, but that turns inward on this. I am sending you out to a group of people who will not understand, and they won't understand maybe for a long time. I'm sending you out into a place where you're going to feel vulnerable and also extraordinarily dependent. And then what he does next is then he takes more dependence or more of their interdependence away. He says this. He says, do not take any purse or bag or sandals, and do not greet anyone on the road. Don't be asking for things in that way. You're going to go into these spaces and find yourself extremely dependent and extremely focused on both the mission and where your energy actually comes. And I'll tell you this, and this is just me, when you read these passages of scripture and what Jesus actually teaches, and you don't just brush through it, but you look through the actual text, I don't miss it. What they were signing up for isn't at all what I would have wanted to sign up for. And what happens is that they go, and then Luke gives all of these details around what happens, and then it simply says this. It says the 72 sort of returned with joy. They returned with joy, and they said, Lord, even if the demons submit to us, in your name, which is weird, and however you talk about demons, I don't think we're talking about pitchfork things. That's not what I'm talking about. But the fullness of the opposition that we felt, the fullness of the lambs among wolves thing that we felt, you made a promise about what was coming and what would happen as we found ourselves submitted and dependent upon you. I put it in my notes to say it this way, that they would have almost said it this way, that we experienced something that we had only witnessed you do, and that's the supernatural power of God moving through a group of people who are submitted to him. And I'll tell you this, and this is just me talking, and it's hard because I get that I'm a pastor, so immediately I lose some credibility in this, but I'll say it this way. This type of thing is the way that Jesus continues to move in the hearts and through the hearts of people. It's through a group of people, even with the fullness of their questions and doubts and struggle, a group of people who come and go, there is something bigger than us that we're going to come and sacrifice and build for, and we're going to lean into that, and we're going to see the miraculous through it. I put in my notes, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, that the movement of Jesus would be carried out by ordinary people who simply decided to get involved. There wasn't anything special about this group of people other than the fact that they came and they were willing and they were dependent. And they decided to be involved, right? Now, I'll tell you this. This is like really, really honest. Again, this is probably the part that we don't want to put on YouTube, but the really honest part about this is there are a lot of phenomenal churches, and I've said this before. What bothered me when I came here, this is what bothered me, and it would keep me up at night. We looked at all of these different cities where we were thinking about planting a church. LA, we looked at New York, we thought we would go to Chicago at one point, and then the super cool and bougie city of Indianapolis. There's another one, and we came to Columbus, and I'll tell you this, the thing that kept me up was when I talked to groups of people in Columbus, it was that I think I've told you this stat before, but like 107 people I interviewed as we were talking through this, like Humans of New York kind of thing, and 106 of them were agnostic. The agnostic thing is what bothered me. It was the piece of this where there was like I'm not sure if we can know, and a lot of the undergirding of those things, I don't miss this, was experiences they had at places that they didn't feel like could give them answers, or that didn't even lean into the questions that they were actually asking. And they were being presented with adult versions of a childlike faith that they felt like they had outgrown and disconnected from. And the local church, I don't miss this, the local church became something that exploded all over the ancient world, not just because they taught everything in the exact whatever. It's not like that. And it wasn't that it exploded all over the ancient world because everything just seemed to make sense all the time. It wasn't that. It's that they were a group of people who believed that Jesus was doing miraculous things because they were close enough, don't miss this, to a generation of people who had seen him die and not be dead anymore. And they believed. And what they created around this was countercultural. They elevated the beauty and the dignity of women all over the place, which was crazy in that ancient world that they were part of. They elevated the power of what it looked like to serve people in ways that other people had never seen. The way that Jesus elevated all groups of people, the way that Jesus would be mistaken for somebody who shouldn't have been spending time over here, and he'd do all these sorts of things. They had all these moments, and it created the kind of community that was ultimately irresistible in the ancient world. And it's not because it was so perfect, because it wasn't. It was messy. You see fights breaking out among some of these like early apostles around what are all the requirements that we're going to have everybody believe to be a part. And man, I mean, I'm with you. The biggest one was over circumcision, and they should have fought that out. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, we got to figure that out, you know? But that was a big thing. Like, how do we... Did he just say that out loud? But it was like he stands up. It's like no. And then you get this quote, and I love it. It's like, we will not make it difficult for Gentiles who are turning to faith, or non-Jewish people turning to faith. I mean, we're going to do everything we can to make it irresistible. And I'll tell you this, and this is just, I'll tell you, if you're here today and you're part of our church, even if you've only been coming once or twice or a few times, or if you're here today and you're part of our church and you've been around for a while, if you're here today and you're disconnected from what we're doing, the reason that you're here, and don't miss this, is not because we're so perfect because it took you about 3 minutes. I just said circumcision. We're not. But I'll tell you this, right? The reason is that there's a group of people who decided to show up on your behalf and build something. Now, again, if you've been coming since we've been in the building, you'll never know this. But one of my favorite stories is the groups of people who were here till like 3 a.m. There's a guy named Ryan Grail. I don't know if he's here today. Ryan was meticulously working on cutting out the letters till 3 a.m. 2 days before launch. And I love this. Nick Perry, who's back with kids right now. Nick Perry stayed the night before launch. I think he was here up until right before I left, right? He was here cleaning. This is a 25, 28-year-old dude sweeping. And he's married. His wife's like, I don't know how he does. I'm just kidding. He does it at the house too. I'm just kidding, right? But there's a piece that he's just making. And I'll tell you, it's not because of we're creating a church. It's not that. It's not because it's going to be so perfect. It's not those things. It's because there's a group of people who believed in the power of coming together and locking arms together and building something that would be beyond them. And so if you're here and you're like a recipient of that, that's phenomenal. We created it for you. If you're here and you've been a part of it and you're like, I like this place, I'm not sure if I love it, like we're not quite Facebook official, I get that too, but it's being created for you. If you're here and you agree with me on every single one of my talks, we're probably different because I may not agree with myself in 3 years, but I would just say this, like there's a piece of me that goes, you disagree with us. There's a piece of me that goes, grow with us. Be a human being in this place. We created it for you to bring the fullness of who you are and the questions that you have. But my challenge to you, if you've been here any amount of time, is that I want you to join us in the mission. Like you can consume, I'll say, we created it for you to consume for a long time. And you come be a part for a long time. I think it's great. And at some point along the way, what I want you to do, and this is what I say, I want you to give the gift that you've been given, right? Or essentially, wow, I forgot that I did that with a box. That was really cool. I'm not ADD. Create an irresistible experience for somebody else. Now, here's what I mean by that. I want you to show up and be somebody who builds the next part of this with us. I love this building. I walk around here during the week and it's hotter than this, and I love this building, and I think to myself, look what our church did. I think it's so great. But like full transparency, right? The greatest hindrance to our vision is having a space that's just big enough to make you feel comfortable about where we are. We are a large enough church to feel like a church, and at the same time, the tendency, and this is a tendency of every organization, but especially churches, is to immediately turn inward and be glad that we have something. And I would rather meet in a tent outside in 98-degree weather than do this. I'd rather not, and this is really hard to say out loud, I'd rather some of you go to another church. I really would. And this is, we love having you, but I'd love for you to go to another church if eventually there's not something about you that wants to like lock arms and go beyond yourself to build. And here's what I mean by that. Now it's like, well, I've been here for 3 weeks. I don't know if I'm ready to jump in yet. I totally get that. But I'll just tell you, this is me. There's a lot of great places for you to consume. I want us to be a church that cares more about the people who aren't here yet than the people who are in the room now. Now, I care about you so much. I'm very pastoral. I get those things. But we're on a mission. And we have, 200-ish, 300, 400, you want 700, about 1,000, about 3,000 people that attend our church. Sorry, some of you have been a part of those churches too, you know what I mean? Yeah, you get that. Ryan's over there laughing. Ryan was telling me stats earlier. I was like, how many people? Yeah. Roughly around 200 of you attend on a weekend. Somewhere in that range, 150 to 200. I'll tell you this, and I mean this. That is a blink, and I'm so happy, but that is a grain of sand in what this city needs. And it's not because we want to be cooler than anybody else or better, or any of those things. I hope every church in our city is filled. And if every single church in our city was filled, it would be 3 grains of sand. I want you, right, and this is the invitation, I want you to not do this, but to do everything you can to reach out and be a part of building something that's beyond you. So I'll tell you how we do it. And I made it as simple as we could possibly do, but this is us, right? First thing is serving, right? I want to invite you to serve. And you hear me talk about this all the time, and everybody's like, you talk about serving all the time. Here's why. It does something for you, and at the same time, it also is a part of building this place, right? I'll tell you this. If you're new to our church, in fact, now I'm new to Nuvo, one of my favorite things to do is like, I just want you to serve for 3 weeks, and then you can quit after that. But if you serve for 3 weeks, that's actually the best way to learn about who we are. You're not going to learn about it just from me talking about it. You're going to learn it by experiencing it. I'm going to ask you to serve. And here's the really honest part. Now, again, I'm an Enneagram 8, so I make everybody butt clench just a little bit when I say these things, and I get it. But let me just tell you this. This is me. Some of you have been attending long enough to where it's time for you to step in. And I need you to step in. Not just because of our church, but for you. It's time for you to step in and lock arms and be a part of building something beyond yourself. The second thing is this, right? Everybody, I love talking about this because it's so easy for me to do. The other one is I think you need to have a plan for giving at our church, and I love this. I say this all the time. When you attend our church, it's not about how much you give. I honestly, I care, but I don't care that much. What happens is a group of people who find themselves generously giving to things that they believe in, it changes their generosity in general. I think you need to be at a place where you have a plan for giving, right? And many of you do. This is what I love. And again, you don't know this because you don't care about this stuff, but per capita, in terms of people that give at our church, it's super high. And one of the things that I love the most is there's a lot of people who give at our church that don't believe at all in what I teach. This is my favorite thing. We have several people that attend our church that give and are fully invested here because of the place that we're creating, not because they believe everything that we believe. And I love that. And that's the kind of church that I think should be created. But you need to have a plan for supporting what matters to you. You need to have a plan for giving. And I always say this, our finances are pretty open book, but I'll tell you this, my salary is fundraised. You're not even giving to my salary right now, which I love to tell people, especially in this season. You're giving to build a church and through the initiatives that we're part of as well. The third thing is this, right? And this is probably the hardest one out of all 4 of them. Many of you need to start telling your story, right? What I'm going to invite you to is many of you have been a part of our church. Many of you are part of the group of people who actually have given their life to Christ over the last year, and I love that. And one of the most powerful things that you could do is to tell the story of how God has been moving and working in your life. And so we're about to tell you how you can do that, but I want you to step up and begin telling your story, both here as a part of this community and beyond. What does it look like for you to share your story about what's going on? And then the last thing is this, right? I want you to invite. Now, I want to give a big caveat to this as well. Number one, real quick, I love doing this. Where are all my introverts at? Introverts in the room, can we just unite slowly with our hands in the room? That's pretty great. Yeah, that's my favorite. That's great. That's exactly what I would do, by the way. And now I'm making it weird because I'm calling you out. That's even better. Yeah, so introverts in the room, I would say this. No, very few people wake up in the morning and go, I get to tell everybody about Jesus today. So I get that. Most people like to leave tracts on urinals. You know what I mean? It's like a $100 bill, but it's not really. Turn it over and Jesus loves you. You know what I mean? Like that's what I grew up with, and that's not great either. I was disappointed. Somebody did that as a tip one time. I was like, no, they're not coming anywhere. Yeah. Let me tell you this, right? Especially if you're wired like I am, it's one of the most difficult things probably to do because of how controversial it seems. But I'll tell you this, and they've done so many studies, it's so much fun to do. I love looking at this. Most people with an invitation at worst are not offended. And then from there, many people are actually open to attending. This is what's so fascinating. It actually offends very few people. And then beyond that, there's more people than you probably realize that are interested. And I'll tell you, this is the way to do it. This is the way I do it. There's not some super whatever thing. This is the easiest thing to do. You're going to talk about your family with people, right? It's like, how are you doing? You get asked this all the time. How are you doing? And your answer is, well, I'm good. And then hopefully there's another question. And somewhere along the way, they're going to ask you another question. They're like, we're good. Your family's good? So yeah. So Henry and Eleanor, they're doing great. Henry's playing baseball. And that's pretty much all I talk about anymore. So he's doing that, and then, Emily's doing great. I talk about my family. People ask you about work. Oh yeah, work's going well. It is a little bit different for me. I'll get my hair cut. They're like, well, what do you do? I'm in nonprofit world, See, I tell them a pastor, they stop cussing. I'm like, they don't have to do that, bro. So there's a little bit of that. So there's this piece of me where I just tell people all the time, I go, how's your work? You're going to talk about your work. And then I would just say, and the things that you talk about your family, you talk about your work, I talk about the Braves, and then I'm going to talk about the thing that I'm a part of building. It's not this super and then Romans 4 says, it's not that. I talk about my work, I talk about my family, I talk about the thing that I'm a part of building. And I'll just tell you this, right? Whether you meant to or not, you just happened to show up when we're around 200 people. So if you're here, you're a part of something that we're building. It's not built yet. You're in the earliest phases of this. We launched in September. We're not even a year old. By de facto, you're like whatever that you're the inaugural group of people, whatever that is. You're the ones that 50 or 60 years from now, people are going to talk about. They're part of it. You're part of building something. So I'm going to invite you to talk about it. And you can invite them to at the movies. We're doing at the movies. We're doing the family movie night. But I'm going to invite you to invite other people and normalize the fact that you just say, this is a part of your life. Now, with all that said, we're going to wrap up in a second because I know what you really want is pizza and you're going to go jump on stuff. And I'm talking to you dads mostly on those two things. I was hesitant to do this, but I love the story, so we're going to do it. A few years ago, I was in a meeting with a team, and the guy who was up there talking about this was a guy who was in his probably late 60s, early 70s. He was about to step out of ministry. So he'd built a really, really large church. He was a part of this from the very beginning. I have all the fun stories, and I'll never forget this. And I would ask him all these sorts of questions about churches because I was always interested in church planning, even when we were starting out there. And I'll never forget, we're sitting in this meeting, and he tells a story. And one of his favorite books is about a group of people, a group of ordinary people. Some of you may be familiar with this, who were part of a rowing team around 1937, right? And so it was University of Washington. They were an 8-man crew of people who had come together in the United States. They were going to participate in the 1936 Summer Olympics in Berlin. You also know that around this time in the world, this was like a huge deal with all of the tension that was happening over there and the depression that was happening, the financial stuff that was going on. There's a group of people who were very ordinary. They came together to be a part of this. All 9 of the people that were part of this team came from very lower to middle class families. They struggled their way to even be a part of the college that they were in. And then what happened is they end up getting to this, and it's an incredible book if you haven't read it, but they end up getting to this place. They end up kind of overcoming so many obstacles. The book's about this. It's really beautiful. And they get there, and they end up winning. They end up beating Italy and Germany. They get the gold medal. It's a really powerful story. But in the midst of it, they have this quote in the book that just stood out. And I remember him teaching on it, and I remember reading the book, and as soon as you get the book, it's powerful. There's so many great quotes. There's this one quote that stands out that I've been looking at for, 2.5, 3, 4 years, in that range. And it's what I think about when I think about you. And whether you meant to be a part of it or not, whether you stumbled into it or not, you're kind of de facto inaugural people who are willing to sweat through a very long sermon to hear even this quote, so I get it. But this has kind of been the prayer for you and what I hope for our church. And it talks about the struggle of these 9 men coming together to be in unity and to be a part of this team that would do this extraordinary thing. Here's what the quote says. The book's called The Boys in the Boat. You should definitely go read it. But here's what it says. It says, somewhere among them, those green and untested boys lay much of the stock from which he would have to select a crew capable of going all the way. So the person leading this, selecting the team. And the trick would be to find which few of them had the potential for raw power, the nearly superhuman stamina, the phenomenal willpower, and the intellectual capacity necessary to master the details of technique. Now, if you're going to be in rowing, these are all of the assumptions that you make about the people that are a part of it. So again, this is a group of people, again, they needed to find people that could do this. But it's the second part of the quote. It's the turn, it's the thing that a lot of people might have had this, but they didn't have this other thing that I think is a really powerful part. It says this. And which of them, coupled and probably with all of those other qualities, had the most important one, the ability to disregard his own ambitions, to throw his ego over the gunwales, to leave it swirling in the wake of his shell, and I love this, and to pull, not just for himself, not just for glory, but for the other boys in the boat. And the image around this group of 9 people in this boat rowing together in sync. This group in the book tells us so powerfully to find the energy to muster up when it seemed like they didn't have enough in it. It was them going together and doing something powerful together and doing it for one another. And so here's my challenge. This is what I hope kind of for us. Ready? You could work on building a church on your preferences, on the things that you want, on all that kind of stuff. You could be a part of a church and fully be a consumer for a long time. But what I'm inviting you to be a part of here is to be this kind of thing, where we row together for one another, but not just for one another, but for one another's kids, and for other people who aren't here yet, who are gonna have kids that experience this place. That we row together for people that you know and that you care about who aren't here yet, and that you're building a place not just for yourself and for the people that you care about, for the people who aren't here yet, and for the other people who are here, who have family members and friends who woke up this morning and the last thing they ever thought about was Christianity or certainly being a part of a local church. And you build from that place. You build from what it means to row together and row for other people. And that's the challenge that I would have for you. That's the challenge I have for me, is that by the time we get to 3 years from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 25 years from now, or 60 years from now, and they're looking back at the first group of people who were part of our church, I'll tell you, and they see all the fun Instagram pictures of whatever sliding down the slide, or they see whatever worship picture that looks a little bit similar to the one before, but there's that one, you know? Or they hear talk after talk or whatever those things are, long after I'm gone. There's something about this place that lived beyond you and it lived beyond me, and what lived beyond us was this thing. A group of people committed to build something beyond themselves and leaning in the way that Jesus has called us to do it. So, here's what I'm going to ask you to do, right? We're going to go out there, we're going to have pizza, there's food, there's all sorts of stuff. I'm pretty sure there's Krispy Kreme donuts floating around here, but I don't know how much there are, so you should grab those quick. And I'll tell you this, if you're here and you've been a part of this place for a while, but you haven't jumped in fully yet, I want you to do that. I want you to do that. We need you to do that. And so the Connect card underneath your seat, I want you to write that on there. I'm ready to jump in. I want to do that. I want you to be a part. If you're here, come on, and you're a person who's been in, but you served, but you know that you're not a part of the other things, I'm gonna challenge you. If you're part of 2 or the 4, I'm gonna ask you to be a part of at least one other thing. All right, that's my time. Be a part of one other thing. And if you're a person, and this is the last thing, and then we're going to wrap up. If you're a person who goes, my life has been positively affected by this place, but I'm not giving the gift that I've been given, I'm going to challenge you to step up and figure out a way to do that on behalf of other people. So we're going to wrap up. I'm going to ask the band to come up, and we're going to end our time together. I'll say this as they're coming up. The song that we're going to end with, Fatima is going to lead us on. It's a song called Goodness of God. And some of you know the story, but for us, when we were planning our church, This song meant a ton to us, in part because of what we believed God wanted to do, but also because we entered into an extremely difficult and uncertain time with our family with like health of our daughter during through that. And it was right on the cusp of us, some of you know this, actually announcing that we were leaving our church that we were at to plant this. And the next day we found out, there it is. That's where, sorry. The next day we found out that that our daughter wasn't feeling well. She had, like, seriously, we thought that she was sick. And then a lot of that worked out, which was great. We went through several months of trying to figure out like what was happening and were we even going to be able to do it. And in the midst of that, this was like the song that we held on to. And I'll say this. Some of you, as I've challenged you to be a part of our church, and you kind of leaned in, I've challenged you to be a part of building this place. I don't think this is, for a lot of you, something that's like distant. For many of us, it's like personal, the kind of church that we're creating. And so as we sing this song, there's a piece of this song that's like vision and like thinking forward, but there's a piece of this song that's actually just rooted in thanking God for what he's done already and being a part of that. And so here's what I'm going to ask you to do. As we kind of sing this song together, I'm going to ask you to like sing it out. Real quick, I love doing this. How many of you are really bad singers? Like you're terrible singers? Or am I really awful? Like you're bad. Like we get it. Yeah, go ahead. He's like, yes. Yeah, me too. I'm going to ask you to sing this out. We're going to sing this out as a prayer. If you're a really great singer, I'm just going to ask you to sing a little bit louder. That'd be great too. We're going to ask you to sing. And in so singing, I'll tell you what we're going to do. There's nothing like over spiritual about this outside of the fact that there's a group of people actually singing this out as a prayer, thanking God for what he's done, but also believing God for what he's going to do. So I'm going to ask you to stand up, and the team is going to lead us in this song, and then I'll come back up and dismiss us here in just a second, but let me pray for us. Father, we thank you so much for what you've done, and we thank you for what you've done on our behalf already. We thank you for the kind of church that you've built through the sacrifice of so many people that are part of this place. And we know that we're just getting started, and we know that we've just started on a journey under where you're taking us. And we just ask that you would move through us, that we would be able to see very tangible and powerful things that you might do through a group of people who are fully dependent on you. God, our stories are similar enough, even in their differences, in the ways that you've worked, and they center around how you've used other people in each of our lives. So God, we just ask that you would use us. We ask that you would use our lives to impact other people as well. And God, we thank you that a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, as we're looking back on this, whether they meant to or not, simply by being a part of this from the beginning, God, they're the group of people who shape culture. And we're the group of people who bring about something that will likely live beyond most of us in this community. And so, God, we just thank you, and we just pray that we would be such good stewards of what it is that you've asked us to build. God, help us to lock arms together. God, help us to sacrifice in the ways that you've called us to sacrifice. God, help us to become the people that you've called us to be. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.